Hey everybody, this is Steve Shultz. We're here with the Elijah Streams today, the Facebook Live version. We're also doing it on YouTube Live. I'm not quite sure how to direct you there, but if you're watching this on Facebook, and even if you get on here late, you can replay this and you can even share it right away. So welcome to the show. We've got a very interesting show today. I would say we're going to have some fun, although this is kind of an important topic. So let me just bring on Will Ford and introduce. This is Will Ford. Many of you
Hello,
have seen him.
everybody.
You saw him a few weeks ago. I think we talked about your son had those visions and
Yeah,
about COVID-19 and beginning to be able. Tell that very last part. You and I were just talking about that as we
yeah,
had to go to air, which is the vision had said it came back and then it was weaker, then it came back and it was weaker again, something like that.
yeah.
I just
So
said it.
7 dreams, 7 nights in a row about COVID-19. But in each dream, the thing that represented the coronavirus came back. It came back, but it was weaker. And
Really good. Really good. Now your picture just froze, so I hope you're there because I can see myself talking. But someone could speak. There you go.
yeah,
Can you hear me now? Okay.
yeah. I can hear you fine. Yeah,
Yeah, you
you're
froze up
good.
for a minute, so I thought you were playing mime with me. Listen, Will and I, did you finish your thought? You were saying that it came back
Oh yeah,
7 nights in a row.
yeah. So the interpretation the Lord gave us was starting April the 30th. This thing was going to begin weaker. And it's going to try to come back, but it's going to be weaker. And then it'll try to be another wave, and it'll be weaker, but it'll come back. So that's what we feel like is happening. And scientists are actually saying that it's gotten weaker, but they expect
Really?
another wave that'll be weaker,
Wow,
and so this kind of playing out the way the Lord gave us an interpretation for it. So the
that's
way they
awesome.
said that the end of April, it was like the beginning of the end of it. That's what a lot of these
That's
scientists are saying.
awesome.
So it's
Well,
interesting.
let me tell our viewers too now that Will and I sit on the same council. We
Yeah.
meet in Dallas, Texas once a year, or sometimes other places. It's called the ACPE, which is Apostolic Council of Prophetic Elders. How's that for a mouthful?
No.
And we get together. Usually, I don't know if we are this year with all the COVID thing, but we get together and compare notes and prophesy live, and different prophets prophesy, and it's recorded. This is what God's saying for the year, and so we usually put out some fresh revelation right after the November time. But
Yeah.
so, Will, why don't you take a minute or two and just talk to people about who you are, your ministry, and then go into that whole Samuel Lockett story. So they
Oh yeah. Yeah. So you know a little bit about me. Well, I'm of course Will Ford, married to De Havilland, and have 4 amazing children. I work at Christ for the Nations Institute 8 years now. I've been the director and chair of the Marketplace Leadership Major at Christ for the Nations to send people in all the different spheres of influence in society. It's a 3rd-year major, and I love what I get to do there to train up marketplace leaders. But aside from that, what most people know me for is this 200-year-old kettle pot that's been in my family. It was used by the slaves in my family. They use it for cooking, but they secretly use it for prayer. Uh, and they would use that pot to muffle their voices so that the slave
So it's a
master.
real big thing. How big was this thing?
It's about this big around. My arms are right,
Yeah.
and about this deep, But it's pretty heavy. It's about 60, 70 pounds when it's outside of the case.
And they were not supposed to be allowed to pray. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they were. There was the irony of slavery. They wanted them to be Christians because they knew that Christian slaves made better workers, but they would pervert the gospel and say, "Slaves, be obedient to your masters if you want to go to heaven." And they were forbidden to learn how to read and write. But the irony of that also, too, with them being Christians, is that they didn't want them to pray because they felt like if they prayed, it would foster hope. If they got hopeful, they felt like they would run away. So they would literally be beaten on that plantation where my forefathers were in Lake Providence if they were caught praying. But they prayed anyway. So what they would do is they'd hold their prayer meetings late at night, and they would sneak in with this 200-year-old cast iron pot that's been passed down, and they would turn it upside down and then prop it up with rocks on the edges so it'd be suspended off the ground about an inch or two. They would then prostrate themselves on the ground and put their lips in between the opening between the ground and the kettle so that the kettle pot muffled their voices as they prayed through the night.
Wow.
And the
Wow.
story, Steve, that they passed down is that they didn't think they would see freedom, so they prayed for the freedom of their children and the next generation. So I've been taking that pot around the country to talk about the prayer bowls in heaven. They use that pot as an acoustic means to keep their prayers from being heard, but literally there's a prayer bowl that God is looking for us to resource, because it wasn't just Black Christian slaves praying back then. There were also white Christian abolitionists who knew that if any person was a slave, was a Christian, then that person was their brother. Those white abolitionists laid their lives down. Many of them were lynched as well and beaten as well
Wow.
because they chose to suffer with the people of God rather than
Wow.
compromise and wink at slavery. And it was the prayers of that godly remnant of not just Black Christian slaves, but also white abolitionists. They prayed into being the first and the second Great Awakening.
Wow.
Had it not been for those revivals, slavery wouldn't have ended. So in 2003, I'm taking that pot around the country. So I started taking it around the country around 2001 with Lou Engle, Dutch Sheets, Bishop Harry Jackson, all these amazing leaders. But in 2003, I had a dream about Dr. King. And in that dream, he began to deal with me with some unresolved issues that I had with white people, honestly, and unforgiveness issues. And so I shared it with my friend Lou Engle. We had this powerful prayer time together. He said, Will, why don't you share this dream at the Lincoln Memorial, the MLK Celebration Day, bring the kettle, share the story of your family, and let's talk about that dream that Dr. King had. Well, there was a white guy who had a dream about Lou Engle, didn't know who he was, and found out that this man really existed. So he came to that prayer meeting. His name is Matt Lockett. We became good friends. We've been friends for 16 years. Well, fast forward, about 5 years ago, Matt found out that the Civil War ended in his family's front yard.
Really?
Yeah, so here it is. I have this kettle pot where slaves prayed for freedom. And Matt has this house in his family's lineage where General Lee fought his last battle in his family's front yard. So we thought, what a cool coincidence, right? But Steve, we stumbled on more research and we learned that it was Matt's family who owned my family, where that kettle pot came from.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah,
I mean, that's.
and we
See this in a.
Yeah, we got to see this in the movie, right?
Yeah, we do. It's going to make quite the movie. Someone's going to make it. We're going to make it. Someone's going to make it. But that's going to be made because only God could orchestrate that. That was not a coincidence, right?
No. So God brings us together, and I've been walking this out. Think about it. We were two guys who were led by dreams to the place where Dr. King said this. I have a dream speech. I have a dream that one day the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit together at the table of brotherhood. And so we met at the place where Dr. King did I Have a Dream speech, the Lincoln Memorial on MLK Celebration Day, which while I'm saying I want to start with this. I'm glad you asked me that because I want people to understand through everything that's going on right now. Listen, it's painful. It's a painful time period right now. But let me be a sign to you today to let you know that God is working on healing this issue.
Wow, that's
He's
so good.
He's working on healing this divide, and
you have hope. You don't feel the hopelessness that so many.
No, I don't. I can't. I've seen too much over the past 20 years of just the lives have been changed, and the reconciliation, and not just reconciliation, but restoration that has come to people's lives.
Wow.
Through just the things I've seen. So even in this moment, I have hope, and I'll share that a little bit more in a second. But I have hope. God is on the move.
That's awesome. Well, we were talking just before we came on about people will think about in Minneapolis when this I want to make sure I get his name. It's George Floyd, right?
Yeah.
Ended up dying. That he's been charged with the officer's been charged with murder, and people will tend to think, especially if you're probably more of the white community, you're going to say, "Boy, that was the flashpoint that started it. Who saw that coming?" But that's not where the flashpoint started this year, is it?
The flashpoint didn't start there. The flashpoint honestly started this year with the coronavirus.
Really?
And the reason why I say that is because once that hit, and we've understood fully at this point, Chuck Pierce's word, which he thought was symbolic, I thought it was symbolic too, that he saw a plague hit America for the first 3 to 4 months. Well, now we find out we're in the middle of this plague, and now we're in this quarantine. I believe that's when the flashpoint started for this, because with the whole thing with social distancing and us not being able to be connected to each other, it exposed the social distance that's been in our hearts.
Really?
Yeah, relationally, but then also amongst different communities. That's what's happened. So I'll give you an example. For the past 3-4 months, I've been working with leaders in the Asian community, because well, a lot of who hasn't gotten a lot of press right now is the fact that Asians are being uh, literally, I want to say persecuted in a sense for
Yeah,
for the coronavirus,
yeah, crazy.
and being attacked by people that don't know them, where people are blaming them for bringing the coronavirus when they're Asian Americans. They're here,
Yeah,
and we had an ugly story where a white man took a knife and to a family of three in Texas, cut a little 2-year-old Asian boy's head, trying to kill the family because he was mad at them for bringing in the coronavirus. He didn't even know them. He just attacks them. And I've had even some of my own Asian friends in California where people have said ugly things to them, threatened them, not even knowing them, just blaming their ethnicity, like their ethnicity is a virus, right?
yeah,
And 70% of those attacks I've found out have been coming from people who look like me, who are African American,
really.
against Asian. Yes, so that's why I've been
Makes no sense.
makes no sense. But we're in this place where the enemy is trying to bring this whole nation rising against nation conflict right now. And so that's why I say it started there and exposed the social distance in our hearts with one another. And then the first thing that happened was with this whole thing with Ahmaud Arbery. They're in Brunswick, Georgia.
And
And
this was this was in February, right? Is that
yeah, it happened in February. I think it was February 13th. That's when it actually happened. But the video of what actually happened they didn't get seen till
and
sometime later, a couple of
for
months
those
later.
that don't for those that don't know the story, what happened? What occurred?
So for what we know, and we don't know we won't know everything until everything comes out. But Ahmaud Arbery was there in Brunswick, Georgia, jogging through a neighborhood, and two other gentlemen, former police officer and his son, thought that he fit the description of somebody who had been burglarizing the area, and so they went to go confront him, and they pulled in front of him, and he ran. He was jogging in their direction, but saw that they had guns drawn on him. So he decided to he kicked into fight or flight mode. He decided to fight for his life by grabbing the shotgun. The shotgun goes off, or somebody shot. But long story short, Ahmaud Arbery dies, and people get to see it on video because there was a third person who showed up, who videoed the incident, and all three of those people are right now been arrested. So that
Didn't it take some months for for justice to be done, right? The arrest would not happen, and so tensions were building literally across the
yeah,
country over
yeah,
this
yeah,
one
because
more incident.
because it was just waiting. It was just the dragging out of all the information, and it just so that happened. Then yeah, Breonna Taylor, she was there in Louisville, Kentucky area. She's a nurse. She's in her house with a boyfriend, and the police officers came, shot up the house. I think she got shot like 8 times, something like that. And but again, another thing where the information is trickling out about what actually happened, and then honestly, sometimes that makes it worse when it takes so long to get the information out. I know you only have one time to present this stuff to people, which is
Right.
true, but when it takes longer than it should, people their minds kick into justice too long delayed becomes justice denied, and hope deferred makes the heart sick, and so that's what the enemy is toying with right now. So those two things happen as the backdrop to what happened just last week.
So, well, on that, I don't want to process this with you because, as
Yeah.
I've said, our head intercessor, as well as four, also
Oh,
an
she's
African.
precious. Yes, I
Yeah,
know
she's
her.
awesome. Our African American lady. She's just very, very precious and a prophetic voice herself. And she and I were talking, and I said, help me come up with some questions that I should be asking because and I just have to tell those that are watching, as a white man, I honestly have tried not to be clueless,
Mhm.
but I just think I remain clueless about the level of injustice, the level of pain, the generations upon generations. We're 400 years
Mhm.
of slavery in this country. Someone shouted out yesterday with some profanity. It's 400 years, blankety blank now, blankety blank you. And those tensions. And it's like, even Israel was enslaved 400 years before um, they came out. And it's almost like there's almost like a prophetic picture there that maybe it has been 400 years, and there's a possibly a crying for freedom. But what I wanted to get from you, or if I could just sort of pull from you, what is the experience that we, at least as Christians, as white Americans, as just Christians of any race, that we are not grasping on the pain level that the African American, especially the African American man, I would say almost is worse, but maybe it's all the same. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if you and I have ever had this conversation, but I had the talk, what we call the talk. My dad gave me the talk when I was actually 6 years old. He's prepping me for the talk. And then when I was 16, he finally gave me the talk. What do I mean by the talk? Most African American fathers, especially in my age bracket, when we were growing up, they would pull their sons aside and say, look, sometimes the police may pull you over for no reason at all. Your job is to say yes, sir, and no, sir. Comply, do whatever they tell you to do. Your job is to get home. It's not your job to get smart, talk back, whatever. Don't worry about that. Just look at their badge number and memorize it. And if you need to do something later on, we'll handle it later. Your job is to get home.
Wow.
So that's what and I've had this talk with other guys, and I'm like, oh my God, you had to talk to you. So it became this thing called the talk. And everybody talked about that around the whole time with the Trayvon Martin situation in 2012. But so let me tell you how this played out in my life. When I was 6 years old, my dad, amazing businessman, he's just great work ethic, and wanted to instill that in all his children. When I was 6 years old, my dad gave me a Social Security card.
6 years old.
6 years old. He said, "This is so you can work." And so he put me to work working for him at the business, and for Universal Carpet Company, I come up there and I clean up like everybody else and sweep the floors and whatever. But he made me memorize my Social Security card.
Wow.
At 6. So when I'm 16, 10 years later, I get my first driver's license, and he said, okay, memorize your driver's license number. And I said, okay, why are you so like obsessed with numbers? And he said, well, here's the deal. I want you to memorize these numbers because sometimes a police officer will pull you over and they'll take your wallet from you. And sometimes if you don't know your information, they can just take you in on suspicion. So that's why I've always wanted you to know these numbers. So then he gave me the talk. Your job is to come home. Don't say anything crazy. So you probably had never had that conversation, but
no such thing. I mean, I just think I think a lot of people watching this right now are going, I've never heard of this.
Right. And
I never heard of it.
So then my dad, he also told me, he said, oh yeah, while he's telling me this conversation, having this conversation with me, he says, oh yeah, don't take the bait. So what do you mean? He said, well, sometimes some police officers, they have their insecurities behind a badge. He said, some of my friends are police officers, and they told me to tell you this. Make sure that you don't take the bait when they try to provoke you into a fight and try to get you riled up. It's just a way that they're going to try to use that to try to rough you up and do something worse. He said, don't take the bait. Your job is to get home. Remember that. So that's at 16. So I'm 19 years old. I've graduated high school. I'm playing junior college basketball in a different city. And myself and two teammates, we're in a grocery store, and we're walking around, and my teammate says, hey, that guy back there, he's a plainclothes cop. He's following us. He thinks that we're shoplifting. I said, nah, no, he doesn't. And sure enough, he was following us in that way. So we got to the checkout line, and Steve, my teammate, oh God, he not just embarrassed me, he scared me, because he gets to the checkout line and he starts screaming to the top of his lungs, yes, I'm reaching into my pocket right now and I'm paying for all my goods today with the money that my mother gave me. I'm saying this because this man back here, he always follows me every time I come in here, and I'm tired of it, and it needs to stop. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm cringing. And so he tried to act like he wasn't a police officer for the longest. He didn't want to blow his cover, but then he walked out with us. He followed us out and he showed us his badge. He said, yeah, I am a police officer, and what you did, that was totally uncalled for. And my teammate is screaming right at him. And then finally the police officer starts screaming at my teammate, and they start cussing at each other. I'm like, no. And then Yeah, and then right next to me, my other teammate, he leans over to me and says, "Hey, Ford, whatever goes down, you got to be down for whatever." And I'm like, "Oh my God." So he's expecting me to fight if this thing gets turned into a fight with a police officer. I'm like, no. And so these two people are yelling at each other. This one's whispering in my ear. Then all of a sudden, the police officer looks at all three of us and says, "So what you gonna do about it, boy?"
Oh dear.
To all three of us. And right when he said it to me, guess what, Steve? I heard my father say, "Don't
Don't
take the
take
bait."
the bait.
And I said, "Come on, y'all, let's go. Come on, y'all, let's go." And so we leave that situation. We cried. We never talked about it again. But here's what's happening right now. The enemy is getting all of us to take the bait.
Really?
He's baiting the whole nation right now. And that word for offense, Jesus talked about offense. The word offense is the word scandalon. A scandalon literally was a trap where you put the bait in the trap and then you put the whole trap and bait in a pit. That whole process is called a scandalon. So sometimes a fox or whatever come across that trap, he'll just bite the fur off or bite his leg off and get out. But if he's in a pit with that trap, he's in over his head. That's what the devil's trying to take us to, a place where we're in over our heads to this thing through getting the spirit of offense is being released in a way we've never seen before. Listen, don't take the bait.
You know, that's a really good word, a good analogy. It's unfortunate it's from real life analogy, but I see we were watching, some coverage yesterday, and then over the internet, someone sent me that photo in Miami where some police officers, both black and white, were on their knees. Did you see that one?
Were they praying together? Or?
Yeah, they're praying, and the crowd was coming at them or towards them, and they were angry. And these police officers all got on one knee, and they were both black and white police officers, and everyone had masks on. And I tell you what, I started weeping when I saw that photo. I feel like doing it now because because all of a sudden that spirit of offense was released off of the crowd.
Yeah,
and they began to shake hands.
That's what we're going to have to come in the opposite spirit of this thing. That's the way you defeat it in the spirit realm. And I remember when Jesus experienced racism. And he was going through a Samaritan village one time, and they wouldn't let him come through because he was a Jew. Jews and Samaritans hated each other. It's like, I don't know if you experienced this growing up. You couldn't cut through certain neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus couldn't cut through that neighborhood. And so the sons of thunder said, "Hey, Jesus, you want us to just call down fire from heaven because of this racism that you experienced?" And Jesus said, "No, the Son of Man didn't come to destroy man's lives. He came to save them." And then he said this also, Steve. He said, "You don't know what spirit you're speaking from." And a lot of times with this stuff, we think we want justice, but we don't know what spirit we're speaking from. We want revenge. And the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. What happened to George Floyd was horrendous. And I hate that it's being hijacked by people who have a different agenda, who are really coming in with these other peaceful protesters who are coming to pray and do other things. But listen, don't take the bait, y'all. Don't take the bait.
What is your picture and understanding of? You probably have a little bit more on the ground knowledge about how, to what degree is it known that the majority of people are trying to just peacefully protest? Do you have a sense for that, other than these Antifa and some that are some of them that call themselves Black Lives Matter, which started off good, but then it went violence. I was even going to ask you what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah, TMZ just put up a clip just shortly where a young African-American girl is confronting a young girl that looks like she's part of Antifa. She's white and she's covered up with a mask, and she goes to a Starbucks, and this white girl paints over Starbucks BLM, Black Lives Matter. And the black girl is confronting and said, "No, you can't do this. See, you're going to walk away from this situation, and they're not going to put your picture on the front page of the newspaper. They're going to put my picture and everybody else's picture. You're making this out to look like it's like we're doing it." And that's what these anarchists and all they're doing. They're trying to incite more of this thing and stir the pot. And much of the fires and much of those other things are coming from these outside elements. The mayor of Minneapolis the other day said that of all the people arrested the other night from the protests, all of them were people from outside of the city.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? So yeah, you can see the enemies trying to get a flashpoint big enough then it's like a world war breaks out, and all of a sudden, it's too late. Everyone gets guns, and then it's a race war. So you can see what the enemy's trying to do.
That's what the enemy
And
wants to do. Yeah.
and even in Portland, which is a flashpoint up here in the
Really.
Northwest, the Northwest is fairly white compared to many areas, and yet Portland is a hot zone for all of the protests, Black Lives Matter, as well as Antifa, as well as anarchists, and they all kind of get in there, and you don't know who's who anymore, and then just other people. But yesterday, after these other, a few hours after I saw this one event, they showed some protesters all on one knee, and that what they call Pioneer Courthouse Square, where all of these demonstrations take place.
Yeah.
And they're all there, and all of them are quietly on one knee. And I thought, this is Portland. 2 days ago, they said this was a historic attack on the city that has never been seen. And now, I don't know what it went like last night, but I was stunned in a good way, stunned that if we continue to use the media that you and I have to get these kind of words out, to come against it in the opposite spirit. And let me ask you this.
Sure.
Will, and when I was talking with Phyllis Ford, I said, give me a couple of questions I should ask Will. And she said, ask him if he had an audience with the president, what would he like to say to the president? What would he say, or what would he add? And so I'm just putting that out. I don't know the answer, and I'd love to hear what you would like to say to him. And this could be either good or bad, or something he needs to know that he doesn't. What would you say?
Well, I would say to the president, one, you probably have a lot more respect and a lot more people who are pulling for you. I put it like that. There are a lot more people, President Trump, who are pulling for you in the African American community than you realize. And you started off really, really well with the way that you responded to what happened with Ahmaud Arbery. You responded very, very well. I love your response to initially with George Floyd and what happened there, and you getting the DOJ involved and the FBI involved immediately to investigate this. We really appreciate your quick response, and I know you have good people around you like Pastor Darrell Scott and Bishop Harry Jackson and others, Mark Gonzalez, a few others, Sammy Rodriguez. They're around you. And I really appeal to you to listen to these men who understand this place that we're in right now and understand how to pastor the nation right now. We need you in that regard. But I wish President Trump, I pray that you let somebody else look at your tweets before you release them. I know you're angry. I know you and I know you're a businessman and you like to get things done a certain kind of way. But right now, we need you to bring peace. We need you to bring calm, and you're the man for the job. You're the one that is in this position right now. You have the authority to do it. Your words, they matter so much, and they brought so much hope in the beginning that you were having this thing go the right way. But the last couple of things you said, they could have been positioned and said better, and not inflame the situation. But I have hope because I've been to the White House. I got a chance to shake your hand while I was there, and I got that White House trip because of a dream. I had a dream that I was being invited to the White House. I'd never had a dream like that before. Never been invited to the White House before. Then 2 weeks later, I received the invitation, and in the dream, I was praying throughout the White House, and I got a chance to shake your hand and pray for you briefly, and that's exactly what happened. And you just need to know that God has people praying for you, and that you can bring healing greater than you realize. And God is going to change your heart to be a change agent, to bring healing. And where the media has tried to shift the narrative about what your presidency is going to be about, your presidency will end as being a healer on this issue.
Wow, that's good. I hope and pray that someone will send this to him because he needs to hear that. He needs to hear that from your mouth, and I pray that he will. Let me just ask you this, and then I'd like to maybe get some prayer points from you and how we should be praying. But you said at the beginning that you have a lot of hope. We know the hope comes from the Lord, but why do you have this hope? What kind of things has the Lord shown you?
Well, here's one of the reasons why I have hope. Of course, I have this crazy story myself, my
Right.
friend Matt Lockett. If
Right.
you want a copy of the book that we wrote together, The Dream King, I gave you like the tip of the iceberg of our story.
Yeah.
Go to dreamstreamcode.com and get our book. It's going to equip you for how to walk through this season. It's called The Dream King, How the Dream of Martin Luther King is Being Fulfilled to Heal Racism in America. But the other reason why I have hope, not just because of that story, but I was actually in Brunswick, Georgia a year ago before all this broke out. I was there to preach at a church. A friend of mine, new friend of mine, Jamie Jackson. Sounds like a black man's name, but it's actually a white man, Jamie Jackson. I think it was the first African American man to preach in his church. But they're in Brunswick, Georgia, at his church, and all of a sudden, I get a vision. And Steve, I'm a dreamer. I usually get dreams, but we're in worship. I get a vision while I'm in Brunswick, Georgia. Again, there's no flashpoints, no race issue, nothing going on. But in this vision, I see 3 strands come down and be braided together. And then all of a sudden, it turned into one wick, woof, and it caught on fire.
Wow.
And the Lord said to me, out of Brunswick, Georgia, will come a burning wick of revival and justice.
Wow.
And so I shared that, before I got to preach, and we had like 15, 20 minutes of praying and declarations during that time period. When I finished, one of the elders of the church came up to me, he and Pastor Jamie came up, and they said, man, you don't even realize it, but 20 years ago, Rob Stearns gave that exact same word in Brunswick, Georgia, 20 years earlier, that God was going to use Brunswick, Georgia to be a burning wick of revival and justice. And so, while I was in that area, see if I got a chance to study it out. And Brunswick, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, that whole area, St. Simon Islands, Jekyll Islands, listen, that whole area is where the Moravian lampstand landed into this nation, into Georgia, right in that place.
I didn't know that.
John Wesley came over on that boat with the Moravians, and that was where he really, he said that he came to faith in a deeper way. He mostly was salvation by works, but when he spent time with Peter Bolo of the Moravians, he learned about salvation through grace, through faith alone. He read the book of Romans and it changed his life. But the Moravians' lifestyle of prayer and fasting, and remember, the Moravians one of the ones that kept a 100-year-long prayer meeting before there was IHOP, International House of Prayer, 24/7. Love Mike Bickle, and he'll tell you, the Moravians did it first. They did it for 100 years straight, worshiping in intercession night and day. They birthed the modern missionary movement as we know it today. Their motto was one at home, one at the field. So for every missionary that went out, one stayed back and prayed for the ones that went out. They also took their caskets, became their suitcases, because they thought they knew they were never coming back. They knew they were seeding their lives and seeding their bodies to go to those other countries. And so they would put their belongings in their caskets. And their other motto was that the Lamb of God may receive the reward of his suffering. And that's why they went out and did what they did. And so they would learn trades and businesses. So they had a marketplace thing on their lives. They would learn trades and businesses and go into other countries, and they will open up businesses and use that influence in the marketplace to save souls and to change lives. The other way they went into countries is they actually sold themselves into slavery. So they could preach the gospel to the slaves. These people were amazing. So the Wesleys are on this boat with them. And John Wesley was so taken by them. And Peter Bowler, their prophet from the Ravens, explains to him this deeper way of life. So anyway, so he starts doing these night watch services in Philadelphia. You know the rest of the story, the Great Awakening. The first one just goes to a whole nother level. Well, there was a black man who was in Virginia, got saved through the preaching of George Whitefield. His name was George Lyle. George Lyle moves to Georgia, that same area, and starts preaching. He got ordained by a Baptist church. This is during slavery. George Lyle was such a powerful preacher as a slave. His slave master said, God's called you to preach, and I got to set you free in order to be a preacher. So he did. He set him free. It's in the 1700s, and a white Baptist denomination, they ordained him and sent him to Georgia to start a church. His disciple, Andrew Bryan, starts the first ever African-American church. It's still around to this day. They're in Savannah, Georgia. It's the oldest church, oldest black congregation in the country. All that's there in that same area of Brunswick, Georgia. Black and white running together. George Lyle then decides he wants to become a missionary, and nobody had ever heard of missionary work at that time. He becomes the first ever missionary to leave America, and he goes to Jamaica. They have a huge statue of him over in Jamaica because he had like
Really?
he had a 4,000 to 6,000 member church of all these people who are bound in slavery. He raised support from around the world, opened up a business in order to fund this work, and George Loud became the very first ever missionary to leave American soil as a former slave.
Really?
Yes. But all that's there in that little area in Georgia. Here's what I'm saying. There was black and white who were running together during that time period, right? Revival and justice running together during that time period. And what I want to say is a bruised reed and a smoldering wick, he's not going to let that snuff out. He's not going to let it be snuffed out. He's fanning the flames of that thing. So the enemy's trying to release, he's trying to burn a wick that's going to light a fuse. But God is trying to fan the flame of love and bind us together with cords of love that can't be broken if we'll just stay committed to stay in this thing together and wait it out. This is the week of Pentecost, right? All the people there in the upper room. And think about it, they came from all over the world. Jesus appeared to 500, only 120, stayed in that room. They came from all around the world and quarantined with each other 10 days, different languages. And they had to work through all their issues. They probably had to fight over toilet paper, like we're fighting over quarantine toilet paper today. Who gets to have two toilet paper?
Yeah.
I mean, real life, real people can't understand each other. I mean, the OK sign in America is okay, but the OK sign in Brazil, that's going to offend some people. They probably offended each other different ways, different languages, different cultures. But something powerful happened. When the Holy Spirit fell, yes, they had cloven tongues of fire in their head, all that. They preached the gospel of signs and wonders. But my friend Jonathan Tremaine Thomas said something that was so powerful to me 5 years ago. He said, one of the most powerful things about the upper room experience is that these people of all different languages, tribes and tongues, different cultures and ethnicities, for the first time, they understood one another.
Yeah, it's the opposite of the Tower of Babel. It's like all of a sudden they're communicating.
God's gonna release a level of understanding. Listen, if we'll just stay in the room. And so that's my admonition to us all right now. Prophetic folks, I love Elijah. I love you. I love all of y'all. Listen, I know some of your friends have said stuff on social media that you're not proud of, that you're angry about or whatever. People are saying things. You're like, I can't believe he would say this or she would say that or whatever, especially minorities or whatever, saying stuff. You're like, where are they getting this from? Listen, stay in the room. Stay in the room with us, because for the first time, we're saying on the outside what's going on in the inside.
Yeah.
Would you just listen to our hearts right now?
And I heard, and tell me this. Let me just kind of end with this. And Phyllis and I were talking a little bit about the issue, and she said, she didn't say, I didn't even know if it's white or black, but someone was coming and giving her grief because she felt grief during these tragedies. And I'm saying, why wouldn't you feel grief? Of course you feel grief, but somebody was telling her she shouldn't feel that way. And she said, don't tell me how I should feel. Well, I would agree with Phyllis. And I just think that, and I'm hearing you when you're saying stay in the room.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing you saying. So listen to the other side. Listen to what they're feeling.
Listen to what we're feeling. And so, if something happened to your son, one of your children, the first thing that you're going to do, you're going to start saying, well, where did he come from? And what did he do before this? Are you going to start asking questions like, what are the stats and figures for people in my son's age group? No, you're going to start weeping for your son.
That's right.
And so right now, that's the last thing, people need is people throwing stats, figures, this, that. The Bible says weep with those who weep. It's a time to weep. And that's not just for white community. You have African Americans who are, upper middle class and elites who are disconnected from what's happening in the inner city and some of these other problems. They work their way out. We're disconnected. And what God is saying to all of us, especially Christians right now, we have a little bit of privilege on our lives. It's time for us to put our privilege at risk to see other people flourish.
Wow. That's a good word.
And you have to put privilege at risk to see it. When privilege is just hoarded to protect yourself, it turns into this idol called status.
Yeah.
And Jesus never used his privilege to protect himself. He always put it at risk to see other
That's a
people
good word.
flourish. And that's not just for, like I said, just for the white community. That's for African Americans and other Hispanics that have moved up, and we moved out the hood and everything else. When there's this disconnect, and some of us, we look back at what's going on, and we don't have tears in our eyes. Some of us are asking those same other questions, and some of us are saying those same stats and figures, and we need God to break our hearts for the things that are breaking his heart, and have a love for humanity once again. And I love it as a prophetic community. Sometimes we err on the side of we care more about what God thinks than what other people think, and that's great. That's one of our strengths as prophetic people. One of our weaknesses is this: we care more about what God thinks than other people.
Yeah.
And we're not emotionally intelligent enough sometimes to enter into moments.
Yeah.
And be present and just be with people. And so we're in crisis mode right now. The most important thing for a leader to do right now is build trust.
That's good.
And that starts with listening.
Well, that's so good. I mean, I'm not going to add a lot of words to this because I'm just going to mess it up if I do. It's just so good. I just want to kind of end with that. I thank you so much for your heart. Man, you really, if I can just say it this way, you have the anointing of God on you today when you're sharing this. It's just coming out. And I mean, and if I could just, just almost finalize it with those same words. You just said, stay in the room. And that was like, that's pretty heavy revy, as some people would say. That's heavy revelation. Just stay in the room with your brother, so.
If we'll stay in the room, listen, there's an outpouring that is coming that is so powerful. We're not going to only understand each other. We're going to understand God on a whole other level, whole deeper dimension. We're going to go deeper levels of intimacy with him, deeper levels of intimacy with each other. If we'll just stay in the room, we stay in the room, we're going to see an epic outpouring release. We've been closed up in a pandemic, but another pandemic is about to come. It's a pandemic of love sickness.
That's awesome.
All these laid down lovers who've been in the same room together all this time. When the outpouring hits us, listen, a pandemic of love sickness will hit if we'll stay in the room. Stay in the room, y'all.
That's good.
We're going to understand each other a whole lot.
That's it. Man, thank you. Will, thanks so much. Thank you so much. God bless you. And give our love to De Havilland, your wife, with your son's having his birthday today. And so you guys have a good time. And thanks again. Thanks again for sharing this. I appreciate it so much. Okay, we'll see you again. God bless you.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have you been blessed and encouraged by the prophetic voices on Elijah Streams TV? We want to keep bringing you God's secrets through his prophets, and you have a vitally important role to help us keep doing this. Without your personal donations, we simply couldn't bring you the interviews we've aired with prophetic voices such as Cindy Jacobs, James Gall, Marilyn Hickey, Lance Wallnow, Todd White, Hakeem Collins, Johnny Enlow, and many more. More than ever, we need to hear what God's prophets are saying to the church and the nations of the earth. Here's how you can help us. Go to ElijahStreams.com and click the Donate Today button and send a gift to Elijah Streams TV. You can choose to be a monthly partner or give a one-time donation. No donation gift is too big or too small. It all helps to keep airing God's prophetic voices around the globe. If you prefer to give by phone, call the toll-free number listed here. To donate online, go to the link on your screen. Or you can text your gift by texting the word GIVE to 541-237-0303. Or you can send a check to Elijah Streams, 528 Ellsworth Street Southwest, Albany, Oregon, 97321. Please give online, call, or write today.